Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for the presentation of the 25-26 governor's budget. So, I'd like to open by saying, obviously, the governor's total focus now is on the communities and residents of the state who have been impacted by the devastating wildfires, and including, in addition to the governor, obviously the entire administration shares that focus, including his office and the Department of Finance. And just would like to say, with everything that's gone on in the last couple of days, as we are working to help do all that we can, but also thinking about the devastating impacts that are taking place in our state and the people and communities that are impacted. Just want to acknowledge our staff at the Department of Finance who, through this, have adjusted given the circumstances, but also remain focused on the core mission that we have of meeting the constitutional requirement to present the governor's budget today. So I'd like to acknowledge and thank all the staff at the Department of Finance for the utmost professionalism that they always show to get our duties accomplished. With that, special thanks to Chief Deputy Director for Budget, Erica Lee, who's joining me at the table today, to our program budget managers who are joining us today in the room and who will be available to help answer questions afterwards, and to the entire executive team for Department of Finance that are here today. Also would like to thank the governor's office for being the great partners that they always are in accomplishing the task of creating and presenting the governor's budget, and also all of the agencies and departments who we worked with. So with that said, we will get into our responsibilities of presenting the budget today. We will start off some of what you'll see. Obviously, the governor went over on Monday, but we will provide additional detail today. First, would like to just start off by acknowledging generally that thanks to the budget framework that the governor proposed last May, to not only, as we were dealing with a significant budget shortfall, to not only balance the budget for the fiscal year that we are budgeting for the upcoming fiscal year, but also ensure that our special fund for economic uncertainty was balanced for the next fiscal year. And through the work with the legislature and them adopting that framework in the final budget, we really went a long way in moving California back onto some stable fiscal footing. And this budget reflects that. As you all will recall, the last two budgets really were built on frameworks around solutions to address significant budget problems. So we were reductions, delays, fund shifts, and things of that nature. And this is not required for this budget. Similar to the LAO, as we have built the budget remained balanced. And the LAO, I think, acknowledged that in their estimate and their fiscal outlook that the budget remained roughly balanced. The budget remained balanced. And in the upcoming fiscal year, and that is in large part due to the work to balance over 2 years in the current budget. Really made great strides over where we've been the last couple of years to where we are now. No need for additional solutions in this budget above what was agreed to in the 24 budget agreement. And we reflect a modest surplus in the governor's budget. So the next two slides, the governor obviously went over on Monday and has gone over in previous budget presentations, but particularly in the last couple of years and still now, we think these are important slides to really show what the state has experienced in the last couple of years. It not only shows kind of historic volatility, but really the extreme volatility that we experienced in the last couple of years. And a couple other, I think, points to make in addition to the great points that the governor has made on these slides in the past is that really when you look at the orange line and the volatility in the revenues, really a reflection of the fact that our revenues don't necessarily always track completely with the underlying economy, and are really a reflection of the reliance on high income earners and the impacts of the performance of the stock market. So you see that here in the revenue volatility that we've experienced, and then also in the next slide as it pertains to capital gains. And you can see the spikes in capital gains that have happened going back over the last over 20 years now, and what's happened after those spikes, and then particularly what we saw after the spike in 2021, where capital gains spiked to an all-time high of percentage of personal income to 11.6%, and what we dealt with afterwards. And I think it's important to show now, maybe even more so, given what we're going through, because when we were reconciling the correction we had in revenues after that spike, our budget problem was exacerbated somewhat by the IRS tax filing delay that we faced, and which really impacted our ability to accurately forecast and understand where revenues were headed. And just making that point because obviously we were likely to face similar delays in the future. So the governor mentioned this at his preview, and felt it was important to point out again after we've seen the evidence of the volatility that we've dealt with in the last couple of years, that we've talked about this the last couple of years, but this year the governor's budget does include a proposal to reform Proposition 2 from 2014, which set the current rules for deposits into the budget stabilization account, which is the state's rainy day fund. And there are two specific reforms that we will be seeking. Number one, increasing the cap of general fund revenues from 10 to 20% that's deposited into the BSA, and then also to exclude deposits into the BSA from the state appropriations limit. This will enable us to save a lot more during the upswings and be able to provide a more stable management of our funds going forward to protect the programs and services that Californians rely upon. So again, just a reminder of some of the top lines of the budget. The governor went over these, some of these on his preview, but $322.3 billion total spending, a balanced budget, $228.9 billion of that is general fund, and then total reserves of just a tick under $17 billion. That includes $10.9 billion in the rainy day fund, $1.5 billion in the schools rainy day fund, and then $4.5 billion in the special fund for economic uncertainty. As the governor mentioned at his preview, that $4.5 billion is roughly $1 billion higher than the SFEU that was included in the 2024 Budget Act. The rainy day fund, again, is balances after the planned $7.1 billion in an additional withdrawal in the budget year, which was part of the 2024 two-year plan, to rather than withdraw the total amount that was allowable at the time in 1 year, to spread that out over 2 years to really, as part of that two-year view and effort to balance over the 2 years. So governor also mentioned that revenues, general fund revenues prior to any new policies are up by 16.5 billion in the budget window. The budget window is the prior fiscal year, the current fiscal year that we're in, and the upcoming fiscal year, and all those impact the bottom line of what's available in the budget year and the upcoming fiscal year. And so general fund revenues, as compared to the 2024 Budget Act, are up by 16.5 billion. This want to make the point that we are very similar to the LAO in terms of our revenue projections here. And even though from the big three, which is what the LAO updated in their fiscal outlook in November, they updated their, at the same time as the fiscal outlook in November, they updated their estimates of revenue from the big three. In the budget window, we are 8.2 billion. We are 8.2 billion higher than the LAO, but as the slide indicates, that's 1.4% of total revenue. So we really are seeing things similarly in terms of where revenues are, and that difference is not really significant on a percentage basis of total revenue. So after the 2-year budget framework, so after accounting for all of the actions that were included as part of the 2024 budget agreement, the budget reflects the modest surplus of $363 million. The slide kind of outlines how we get to that modest surplus. The bottom line is you start with our SFEU from the current budget, account for all the changes since then, mainly the changes in revenue. You can see the 16.5 billion there that we talked about in the previous slide, changes in expenditure, and then once you also account for the level of SFEU that we have included in the upcoming budget, 4.5 billion, you get to the discretionary surplus of $363 million. I know these, we've got Governor and we've received a number of questions on how our current estimates compare to the LAO. I mean, I again say that there's not a big difference in where we see things and where the LAO see things. In terms of the $2 billion that they reference in their fiscal outlook versus the $363 million surplus that we have, we, given the questions, provide a breakdown of the differences here. And just really the bottom line is the biggest difference here, as you can see, is in revenues, where total revenues, not just from the big three, we're 9.4 billion higher than LAO, and that is kind of the biggest difference between where we land and where the LAO lands. Again, we're not that far away from each other. So given how far we've come in the last couple of years in addressing the significant shortfalls that we faced, and now being in a place where we are a lot better off than the last couple of years, we're not facing a budget shortfall. We do recognize that we still have work to do to ensure long-term sustainability and other pressures going forward, and we are limiting new investments in this budget above baseline investments, which we'll talk about in a second. And so total workload and discretionary new spending in the budget is approximately $1.2 billion. This would be for things like supporting enacted legislation, providing support for existing programs who have funding that's expiring, or things such as ongoing IT projects. So the in addition to kind of where we are and having the balanced budget in the upcoming fiscal year, we do recognize that we are seeing some significant growth in some of our baseline programs, and that carries out into the out years, and that there are there's growth above what we see as normal revenue growth in the out years, and this is going to drive the need for us to continue to assess those ongoing and out year spending pressures, and we will make the necessary adjustments at the May revision. So next, I'll go over some of the governor's budget highlights again, and you all have the overview document. There is very limited new commitments in this budget. It really is balanced, but we recognize the need to also remain fiscally prudent, and again, ensure that we're setting ourselves up for long-term stability here. But there are some of the highlights of this budget, particularly some of the new things in the budget I will go over next. The first one for Prop 98, the governor did preview this in his preview of the top lines. The guarantee level for Prop 98 in the budget year is $118.9 billion. You can see the growth here from 2015-16. For the current year, the guarantee level is $119.2 billion, and for the prior fiscal year, the guarantee level is $98.5 billion. Excuse me. Would note that this is over those 3 years, the guarantee is increased by $7.5 billion. There is one adjustment in the budget where in the current year, where the guarantee level is $119.2 billion, we are proposing to appropriate $1.6 billion less in the current year, and this is in recognition of the revenue volatility that we experience, and we will continue to monitor this going forward, and eventually this would be addressed when we have to certify the current year in the spring of 2026. Lastly, just note total funding for TK to 12 schools in the budget year is $137.1 billion. So again, these next couple of slides, the governor went over, so I won't spend too much time on them, but I just will note again that we are in the education world meeting significant transformational milestones in the budget year. This includes, as the governor noted, full implementation of universal kindergarten, transitional kindergarten, $1.8 billion in additional money in the budget year for that, $5 billion total. Implementation of before and after in summer school programs, $435 million in the budget for that, $4.4 billion total, feeding nearly 1 billion, serving nearly 1 billion meals in the budget year, and then also the full implementation of screening for risk of reading difficulties for all K through second grade students. In addition, implementation of grants for more than 2,000 community schools, the literacy roadmap, and then the implementation of children youth behavioral initiatives to allow schools to reimburse student behavioral health services. A couple other points. The governor also made some of these, but with this a little bit more detail, the COLA is 2.43%. This equates to approximately $2.5 billion. We are including a discretionary block grant of $1.8 billion to allow LEAs additional support to address some of the rising costs pressures that they're facing. $500 million for literacy and mathematics coaches. This continues to build upon an existing program and adds mathematics coaches there. $378.6 million for Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant to help establish learning recovery programs through the 27-28 fiscal year, and then the additional funding for teacher recruitment of $300 million. The governor also mentioned master plan for career education. There is funding in the budget for this, including $100 million in Prop 98 in community colleges budget for the credit for prior learning and career passport components. There's $5 million for Gov.CA.Gov agency to do statewide planning and coordination. And then there's $4 million for labor agency to support regional coordination efforts. Next, just notes obviously the two bonds related to climate and education passed in November. For the climate bond, the budget will be proposing $2.7 billion for projects in the budget year, and have discussions with legislature on those, as well as additional allocations. But this also includes $1.5 billion for wildfire and forest resilience projects that will or programs that we'll talk more about in a second. Education bond, $1.5 billion for 2025-26 for TK through 12 schools, and this is more of a normal allocation level for schools in fiscal year, and then $51.5 million for community college projects. So obviously, given the current circumstances, we wanted to highlight the significant investments that have been made in the budget by this administration to address wildfire risks. First, to supporting wildfire resilience, there's a total of $2.5 billion for prior investments. This included $200 million that's annual through 28-29. The $200 million, approximately $200 million, was what existed when this administration began, and then over the last few years, an additional $2.5 billion has been invested, and then there's a proposed in the budget, as we mentioned, $1.5 billion in additional investments from the climate bond. In addition to this funding, there's been significant fundings for other aspects of preparedness or response, including acquiring 16 new state-of-the-art helicopters and 7 C-130 air tankers. Additionally, CAL FIRE's firefighting capacity has been expanded significantly over the last few years. Since 2018-19, it's essentially doubled. And we added now have $1.3 billion ongoing been added, and approximately 2,400 new firefighters. Also, significant investments in technology, including for advanced mapping and detection cameras, and then also tools for real-time intelligence. Next, talk about some of the tax-related proposals or revenue-related proposals that are in the proposed budget. First one, everybody's aware of. The governor spoke about it at the preview, the film tax credit expansion, again, raising it from the current $330 million level to $750 million. We're also including a exclusion for military retirement income up to $20,000, and there's also a income threshold for filers with joint filers up to $250,000, single filers to $125,000. This proposal is expected to reduce revenue by approximately 130 million in the budget year and 85 million ongoing. We also are including a wildfire settlement income exclusion for that would provide tax relief for wildfire victims. This is for the 2025 through 2029 tax years. We are also including a mandatory single sales factor for financial institutions. So this changes the factors financial institutions use when estimating their taxes in California, and it moves them to the process that is currently required of most all other industries, and essentially addresses the issue where California located companies are end up being disproportionately harmed, if you will, by the current structure. And this change in the calculation doesn't change any tax rates, but this change in the calculation is expected to result in additional revenue of 330 million in the budget year and 250 million ongoing. So getting close to the end here. Again, this is a slide from the governor's presentation. Just want to note that we're continuing to work on government efficiencies. This shows where we are in terms of the vacant positions and the operational efficiencies that are reflected in the budget. This represents all funds over the 2 years, but also want to note here that as we implemented the efficiencies and the vacant positions initiatives, we exempted 24/7 posted positions and also positions that were essential for life and safety, including firefighting positions at CAL FIRE. There were, and also would reiterate for the vacant positions that these are eliminations of positions that have been vacant, that are not filled and not performing duties. But beyond that, CAL FIRE, firefighting, emergency response, the positions related to anything related to health and safety were exempted. There was a small efficiency reduction related to admin resources at CAL FIRE, but want to note here that obviously, given the circumstances, we are exempting CAL FIRE from any efficiency reductions and in ensuring that they will have all the resources that they need as we move forward and deal with the current circumstances. Also would note, included in the exempting of 24/7 critical health and safety resources is CHP. So a couple of other just notes on some other new funding or other funding in the governor's budget. There's an additional 60 million for additional round of Cal Competes grants. There is 25 million to support a CHIPS design and collaboration facility in Sunnyvale that the state was awarded, and there is up to 7.4 million in the budget year, growing to a little bit over 12 million to provide a 3-month supply of diapers to all babies born in the state. So lastly, and then we'll open it up for questions. Obviously we are in, as mentioned, a lot better shape. Revenues, besides remaining balanced due to the 2-year frame that was included in the current budget, revenues are up, and that's also, a reflection of a growing economy and seeing in our forecast, seeing some good signs on the economic front that also influence our revenue projections. But with that said, we do understand that there are always risks, and some of the current risks that we are facing include the stock market volatility. Obviously, noted earlier, a lot of the volatility in our income is driven by the performance of the stock market, and so any changes there could have an impact on revenues here in California. As the governor has mentioned, also the uncertainty around federal policy, tariffs, and immigration policy obviously could have some impacts in California, in particularly on tariffs. The ports, Oakland, Long Beach, LA, the logistics industry, and the Inland Empire all could be impacted by some of the tariff policies that we've heard may be coming from the incoming federal administration. Then even outside of potential impacts of tariffs, immigration policy on costs and inflation, we know we've seen recently some indications that the feds may slow down in their rate cuts, and so just any sustained elevated inflation and the subsequent restrictive policies by the feds could also begin to show in our economy here in the state and our revenues. And then lastly, it's mentioned at the beginning, and we've talked about before, in 2023, we had at the time unprecedented IRS tax delay that impacted essentially the entire state, and our deadline was eventually extended all the way through November. That, as mentioned at the beginning, was done at a time when we were having a significant revenue correction, and really just added another significant layer of uncertainty and complexity to our revenue forecast, and impacted the budget challenges that we faced in the last couple of years. And so we do recognize that there is likelihood that we are going to face additional tax delays due to disasters going forward. With that, again, I just want to thank all of our staff, Department of Finance, the governor's office, the governor, the entire administration, and we look forward to, this is the governor's proposal, and we look forward to working with the legislature over the coming months to get to a final budget for the state of California for the 25-26 fiscal year. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Taryn Luna with the LA Times. Can you guys explain the 6,500 jobs being permanently deleted in comparison to the 10,000 that was announced the same time last year?
Yeah, so the 10,000 was estimate that was that we spoke about at the Budget Act. Since the budget has been enacted, we have spent a lot of time working with our departments and agencies. And again, as I mentioned during the slide that referenced those 6,500 vacant positions, we went through the steps of working with all departments and agencies and understanding what should or shouldn't be included. And that's where you get to when you start excluding things such as the fire safety required positions, then what we felt was reasonable to include at this point to reduce vacant positions by and ensure we're not having significant impacts on programs and services of the state is 6,500.
So instead of 10,000, now it's 6,500.
Correct.
Okay, and then help me understand just kind of big picture. How can the state justify declaring a budget emergency and taking money from the rainy day fund at a time when we say the economy is doing better than expected and we have higher revenues than expected?
So it goes back to, we have to understand the budget framework for 2024. That was the dealing with the shortfall and the correction that we are facing. We were seeing multiple year impacts, and the amount that we're withdrawing is part of the amount that was allowable to withdraw in the 2024 Budget Act. Instead of taking it all in 1 year and doing what is more prudent fiscal management, we spread that withdrawal out over 2 years. And the actions that we took associated with the 2024 Budget Act balanced the state budget over 2 years. There are other actions that are included in the budget that are associated with that 2024 budget agreement, and this is one of them. So, and would also say that it's the budget stabilization account by its nature is set up now. The deposits are set up to capture capital gains during times where capital gains spike, and in recognition of the volatility there, and to be able to use that to help protect programs and services during downtime times. And that's exactly what we have done here with our plan on how we're using the reserves.
Okay, then to that end, I just have some questions to clarify this to readers. So if we're talking about 25, 26, cutting that budget in 24 budget planning, can we legally do that, or is this all proposed and hasn't actually been taken effect yet?
I'm not sure I understand.
So last June, when we said we're going to preemptively cut the 25, 26
we did
budget.
not cut a 25, 26 budget last June. We planned. So
right.
we cut the 24 budget last year, but we had a 2-year plan because we could estimate, we're required to include out years in our budget forecast and our multi-year estimates. And so we had the estimate of not only what the budget problem was in the upcoming fiscal year at the time, but also in out years. And so we planned to ensure that we were not only balancing for the budget year, the current year, but the next year. So we planned. And so that plan included a number of actions that now need to be taken during the 25-26 fiscal year.
That's how I understand it too. So then I'm confused. So when we're talking about a deficit right now, which we typically right now have a point in time look at either a surplus of a deficit, we're talking about we're having a surplus, a moderate surplus of $380 million. But right now, actually, we have a deficit because those plans have not been enacted into law, right?
So we have a surplus after accounting for all of the actions that were part of the 2024 budget agreement,
but have not been enacted. So what is the point in time where we're at right now in January surplus or deficit number?
It's the $363 million that I referenced earlier. We are there. All of the things that we planned for in 2024 that were part of the agreement, we are assuming those are part of our baseline, and so we're building the budget from there. And based on that, we have the modest surplus of $363 million.
Is that a change from prior budget strategy, where in January we were saying whether we had a deficit or surplus in X amount, not based on plans, but on the reality of economic situation?
There have been numerous times in the past where we make agreements as part of budget acts that have to be reflected in subsequent budget acts.
In January, it reflected, so the budget deficit changes in January. Like we've had this exact same scenario before, because I've talked to experts who said we haven't, and it feels like this year we're projecting a surplus based on in the reality in the moment that we don't have.
Okay, so I don't think we've ever, when we face such a significant budget shortfall, that we've ever balanced over 2 years. And so that's unprecedented. So we are in unprecedented budget times here. But based on what we did and the prudent fiscal planning that we did in 2024, and accounting for all of the agreements as part of the 2024 Budget Act, we are where we are.
I guess it's just hard because we're saying we have to dip into the rainy day because we have a deficit for 24-25, but in this moment we have a surplus. So it's hard to explain all of that with readers without being able to say the overall deficit number that they're solving for 25-26 is X, even though they've done work and agreed to cut out a certain amount of it, right? So I think that that's where the difference is in terms of trying to explain it to readers or people when we've taken those kind of made the adjustments now for
Yeah. So I
planned
think
cuts.
the basic answer is there was an agreement at 2024 Budget Act. After that agreement, I am explaining to you where things stand, and accounting for that agreement is not unprecedented. We often account for agreements as part of budget acts that still need to be enacted in subsequent budgets.
Hi, Director. Thanks for the presentation. Stella Yu with Cal Matters. I just wanted to say, kind of like piggybacking on Taryn's question. So when it comes to the drawing down from the rainy day fund, I mean, the governor has talked about uncertainties laying ahead with the federal administration potentially withholding disaster aid in the future. We're also, seeing all the kind of economic risks that you're talking about. Why still go ahead with withdrawing this year, knowing that we only have a modest surplus and we might have to spend more money on wildfires or all these other risks?
Again, I would go back to we actually were exercising prudent fiscal management by not withdrawing the entire amount that we could have withdrawn in the current fiscal year, and we spread that out over 2 fiscal years. And what that allowed us to do was to enact other solutions over the 2 years that helped really deal with the underlying shortfall that we were seeing, rather than using the entire amount from the reserve in 1 fiscal year.
Mm-hmm. And to that, so you actually mentioned, the governor is proposing a reform of Prop 2. So my understanding is that it would require a ballot measure that goes to the voters. How, is something already in the works? How are you planning to make that happen?
Yes, it would require going back to voters, and we will have a proposal that's associated with the budget, and then we'll have the discussions over the coming months with the legislature on the exact process of how that will take place.
Mm-hmm. And another question for the wildfire settlement tax inclusion. So you mentioned that would apply to fiscal year tax year 2025 to 29. So how much money are we expecting, given the scope of even just the wildfires this week?
So we wouldn't actually project an impact to our state revenues based on this proposal, because we don't plan for revenues from settlements going forward. So there's no expected revenue built into our planning, and so there wouldn't necessarily be an impact from the proposal.
Mm-hmm. And my last question for you. So on Prop 36, are we anticipating, reopening a prison or prisons to accommodate for the projected increase in the number of inmates? And I did see that the budget for CDCR is going to be cut mildly. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I was wondering, given the fiscal impact of Prop 36, why still cut the budget? Are we anticipating a reopening of a prison?
So we are managing that the projected impact of just over 1,600 inmates within the current plan, and that also includes some of the reductions to CDCR. That those reductions are primarily associated with the 2024 budget agreement and the efficiency reductions that were included there. So we are managing both of those at the same time, and that plan is reflected in the governor's budget. We will also obviously have to continue to monitor the exact impact, the projection at the time of Prop 36, and if there are necessary adjustments going forward, of course, we'll make those.
Thank you.
Hi, Sophia Bolag with the San Francisco Chronicle. Wanted to get a little bit more detail on these potential tax collection delays. So when you are talking about disasters that might result in the kind of delays we saw 2 years ago, are you just thinking of the LA County fires right now, or are there other disasters that you anticipate would potentially cause delays?
So from the experience that we had with essentially 99% of the state being delayed, and really understanding the process now from the IRS and what is happening not only here but in other states. I think we're better prepared now to understand what the impacts might be. We did adopt a proposal last year that gives us discretion now on whether we conform or not every time. But with that said, currently there's a major disaster declaration for the LA wildfires, and so that is likely going to trigger some sort of tax filing delay from the IRS. So we do anticipate one happening from these wildfires. We are not anticipating any others at this moment that I'm aware of.
Got it. And would you, based on what you've learned in the last couple of years, do you anticipate it would just be for LA County at this point, given the fire situation, or do you think it would be more widespread in the region?
So it would apply to the counties that are included in the declaration. So
okay,
yeah.
Understood. And in terms of, you mentioned that you've, learned a lot since the last time there was a major delay that resulted in, or at least contributed to, major budget deficits that you guys then had to solve for. Would you approach a similar delay differently, and how would you approach it differently? Can the people of California expect that we're going to have more deficits as a result of this, or is there anything you can do to prevent that?
Yeah, and so the real impact of the delays doesn't really impact the overall size of a potential deficit or surplus, but what it does is it creates a higher level of uncertainty, clouds our ability to accurately predict or estimate revenues and complete our revenue projections, and so it. I guess in my mind, couldn't have happened at a worse time when it did happen in 2023 for the 2022 tax year because of, as I talked about at the beginning with the capital gains slide, because it happened at a time when right after we had that significant spike and when we were correcting, and so it just added on to a higher level of uncertainty in a time that we knew we were in one of those instances of some significant swings in our overall revenue. I think the things are different now, where if you looked at that slide again, we are projecting just more steady growth going forward, and so there's not as much of downside risk as existed during the previous delay. Also, again, that delay applied to essentially the entire state. Now, even though LA County, surrounding counties are a significant portion of the state, we're not, at least at this point, anticipating that the delay would impact as many taxpayers as it did in the prior delay.
And understood that this is, obviously the fires are not reflected at all in the budget document that we're, talking about today because they just broke out. But beyond this likely delay that we're talking about, how else do you anticipate that the fires could affect the state budget?
So, unfortunately, we are fires and natural disasters are something that we have been having to deal with for a number of years now, and we have our mechanisms in the budget to deal with them, and so we are, a lot of it is really in the response recovery activities, and that's where money comes from special account within our SFEU, and that's one of the reasons that that the governor is including a higher SFEU this year. But then a lot of those costs are reimbursed by the federal government, and I think for this, the federal government just announced yesterday, I think it was full reimbursement for the first 180 days. So obviously that will be a big help to our state. In terms of the overall cost from this particular emergency, we're in the mode now of ensuring that our communities are safe, and we are beginning to assess, but it will obviously take some time for us to really know what the kind of true impacts are from a fiscal perspective.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Angela Hart with KFF Health News. I'm hoping someone can help me understand some of the details in the homelessness section. The top lines reference $100 million in the encampment resolution grants. Is that the entirety of state funding that's currently unspent and on the table, or is there still existing HAP funding or other funding that's available?
Yes, there's still rounds of HAP that still are scheduled to go out. So there is additional funding that's previously been approved that will still be allocated.
What dollar amount is that?
I don't have the dollar amount off the top of my head, but we can get it to you shortly after this event.
Okay, that would be great. And then also references that the governor is open to working with the legislature for additional proposals for funding on homelessness. Does the governor have any additional ideas about additional homelessness funding to address the crisis?
Obviously, this has been a priority of the governor of the administration and remains one. What's reflected in the document in the 8 pages, we know we anticipate additional resources going forward, but what's reflected in the 8 pages is that in those discussions on those additional resources, we really want to ensure that there is a higher level of accountability, and that's really the focus of the governor's budget at this time, knowing that we are going to have discussions on, additional resources to combat this issue.
So new funding and on top of the HAP and the ESG money and the encampment resolution grant.
Well, the additional accountability for new funding.
I'm asking, so you're saying there is a potential for new state funding to address homelessness on the table, even though it's not called out here?
I would say on the table there is, but we know that we are going to have discussions on new funding. We acknowledge that, and what the 8 pages lays out is that in those discussions, the administration is seeking additional accountability of any new funding in this area.
Thank you. I see that too, that in order to receive current and potentially future state funding, that local governments have to have a local encampment policy. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to make sure. So that's for current funding and potential future funding.
I'm not looking at the text now. I know it's for potential future funding and for existing. Yes.
Okay. Do you have the details of those local encampment policies? What do those require specifically?
I don't have them right now, but that's something that we can. We are. I think first we'll have to have discussions with the legislature on regarding this additional accountability, and I think that those details probably will emerge after we have some of those discussions.
Okay, so that's not set in stone. That's not outlined yet in state policy?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, I would like to have that conversation. Looks like there's a lot of unanswered questions. So for future, just for reference, that would be great to maybe have an offline discussion about that with someone who can explain that to me. And then just one more question about this new homelessness agency, the Department of Housing and Homelessness Agency that the state is going to create. It looks like it's going to sort of look at policies and funding across different departments. Is that correct? Is there new funding that's going to be attached to that, or new policies, or is it really just sort of amalgamating state funding and policies across different current agencies?
The vision would be to have that, ensure that the state agency that is solely focused with this mission that would enhance the coordination of all of the efforts out there. With that said, we are acknowledging in 8 pages, but the actual proposals to create the new agency for housing, both housing and consumer services, will be going through the Little Hoover process.
Right, but so it's a new state agency. The state's creating a new homelessness agency to connect current agencies. Am I understanding that correctly?
Current programs related to housing, and how those programs are administered either within the new agency or across agencies.
And it says healthcare too. So, for example, CalAIM, there's a major component of CalAIM which addresses homelessness.
Yeah.
So would this new agency be able to really look at CalAIM from those two, like, health and homelessness perspectives, or would it be like would it be new responsibilities and new funding? I'm confused about that still.
So I think because there's a whole process that needs to be completed to actually establish the new agency, and some of the questions you're asking are getting out ahead of that process a bit. The vision is to be able to better coordinate from one single entity at the state across all those programs, which would include the CalAIM programs. With that said, there is a process that still needs to be completed to understand exactly how some of those details will be fleshed out.
Okay, thank you.
Antonio Harvey, California Black Media. Just had a question about the film and television tax credit expansion. It seemed like it's jumping from $400 to $420 million, $330 million to $750 million. I just want to know, why is that such a big jump, over a 2-year span compared to the budget act of 2023?
So that's the increase in what the annual awards of the tax credit could be. The biggest drivers here are that the program's been oversubscribed for a number of years now, that this program supports the good paying jobs in a legacy industry here in California, and we are increasingly having to compete with other states, other jurisdictions, and so given the experience of the current program, the oversubscription, the success in creating jobs and keeping production here in California, we felt like it was important to increase the program to address the current environment surrounding the industry here in California.
Appreciate the response. Now, this proposal also includes improving and supporting work enforcement investment and diversity requirements. How do you plan to go about that? Because I know there was some eliminations in some DEI programs in the industry maybe a couple of years ago that affected people of color. How would you go about, putting together work enforcement investment and diversity requirements? Let me explain that, because Assemblywoman Tina McKenna and Senator Lola Smartwood-Cuevas have mentioned putting together a task force to kind of monitor, these industries and their hiring practices and, jobs and things like that. So I just want to know, what type of requirements are you planning on installing?
So there are currently diversity requirements within the tax credit, the existing tax credit. There's certain percentages that are held back dependent on companies meeting certain diversity requirements, and that was, I think, implemented, I want to say, in the last version of the tax credit, and anything in addition to that, those will be discussed during our deliberations with the legislature.
And my last question, you did say there was going to be a discussion with the legislature, Mr. Stephenshaw. Is there going to be a task force put together to monitor, these type of things and make sure that these things are taken care of as far as reinstalling some of those DEI programs in this industry?
That's not currently part of our proposal, but I'm sure it's something that we'll discuss with the legislature.
Thank you.
Hi, Blake Jones with Politico. First, I wondered if you could explain a little bit about how the special session proposal factors into this. I saw there are some augmentations for the Department of Justice in the summaries, but I, didn't see the 25 million figure. And I wondered if you could kind of put that in context for me.
Yeah, the special session, as we are hopefully finalizing those discussions with the legislature, so it's kind of happening outside of the budget process, and so there's not necessarily a reflection of whatever is going to be in the final agreement on the special session in the budget. But then beyond that, those are, whatever happens, especially will be current year adjustments, not necessarily things that would impact one way or other the upcoming fiscal year's budget.
Gotcha. So this proposal doesn't assume that spending increase. There's nothing in our proposal that reflects it in the upcoming budget year. I think as we account for our overall commitments, kind of off. It's something that we understand it will potentially impact the bottom line, but it's not something that is in part of the upcoming budget. Gotcha. You said you're hopefully close to finalizing that. Is there anything more you can say about, where negotiations have gone and where they're at right now?
There's not much more I can add in terms of the special session now. Really, our focus has been on today and the events going on in Southern California.
And one more thing. I know earlier you talked about the legislation that you all passed last year, giving the Department of Finance discretion over where to implement tax delays in response to emergencies. I wondered if you all have gotten any pushback from the IRS or the White House on getting that authority, or if they've been fine with you all kind of taking control over that decision.
I wouldn't say that. I don't know what their position is. We have not got any pushback from them, and really, that's really I don't know if they would opine, or particularly IRS. That's really a matter of how we manage here in the state.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Rachel Booth from Politico, and I would like to dig into MCO tax numbers, please. So earlier last year, Prop 35, we were told that it would create like a $12 billion hole in the budget plan as laid out. These numbers are looking like less. It looks like maybe a $4 billion decrease over what had been hammered out in the budget. Can you kind of square that for me and help me understand that?
So what we've included in the budget is it actually is in the budget window, $1.2 billion increase, and then in 26-27, I think it grows to about 1.8 billion, and it's 1.2 billion in the budget window because you net. There's actually less spending in the current year because there's now a delay to ensure that we are implementing the proposition consistent with the requirements, the stakeholder group, et cetera. And then there's a cost of $2.2 billion in the budget year. I think the kind of difference here is we are accounting for all of the increase to the existing tax, the amendments, as revenue outside of the proposition, and that is still being used to offset
current Medi-Cal expenses.
So can I say that the 12 billion estimate was wrong and this is like a better, updated, more correct number? Because it's like it says decreases of 2.2 in 25-26 and 1.8 in 26-27. So that that initial, this is going to cause a $12 billion like decrease from what you planned for, looks like now $4 billion. Like, is that accurate?
I would say that we have spent a lot of time reviewing the initiative. It was there are a lot of questions about, and I think there are different opinions on what MCO revenues would and would not be impacted by the initiative. And for the governor's budget, we feel confident that where we landed, that the revenue from the amendments again would not be subject to the requirements of the initiative, and so that's where we are in terms of what the impacts are now.
Okay, so the recently approved amendments from last month.
From December, yes.
Got it. So those are not subject to Prop 35 under so that revenue is offsetting maybe what the potential decreases from Prop 35.
Yes. It is because I would make sure wouldn't say it's completely offsetting. I think if I understand how you're explaining it, but it is not being it's not being doesn't have to be accounted for within Prop 35, which is what some of the initial assessments were, and because of that, the overall cost is not that's reflected in the budget is not the same as what you're referring to was previously cited.
Got it. Okay, thanks. Helpful. Do we have any updates on CalRx, the insulin initiative? It's kind of mentioned in here that hey, we're still working on it. Does it need more money? Anything that we're going to be seeing in the budget?
We don't have any additional funding in the budget, but we will work to get you. I don't have an update right now, but to get you an update as soon as we can after this. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And lastly, just federally, we're hearing a lot right now about potential cuts to Medicaid, maybe even to the ACA. How is DOF kind of thinking about this? Are you again, not a lot of extra money to play with here, so how are we handling the potential loss of Medicaid funds going forward?
So obviously that's something that we're looking at, and in addition to assessing all of the potential impacts, we understand that there will be potential pressures created, and this is an area where there could be more significant pressures than others. But we really have to wait and see and understand what actions are actually taken before we could give you any definitive answers on how we would respond.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Hi, Lindsay Holden with Politico. I just want to spin off some of Angela's questions about homelessness, just to make sure I understand. So last year's budget agreement included $1 billion for round 6 of HAP. I'm assuming that is continuing in this budget, but it doesn't look like there's funds for round 7. Is that correct?
That's correct. And HAP, the HAP funding, the $1 billion, have been one-time additions to budgets the last few years, and so you are correct. The funding that was added last year will be allocated, but we did not include an additional round of HAP in the governor's budget proposal.
Okay, but it sounds like kind of what Angela was saying. Is that kind of contingent on legislative discussion? So if legislators are interested in that, that might be a consideration.
I would say that I recognize that the legislature has been interested in that the last couple of years, so I anticipate that will be a likely discussion that happens over the next few months.
Okay. And then in terms of the new agency, can you kind of explain how that will work from like an org chart perspective? Like, will it be like reorganizing folks from HCD from different, like how will that all work? Will it, because it doesn't look like there's more money for an additional
Yeah, and
agency.
I don't want to get out ahead of the process here, and so I can't. There's this reorg is going to go through the Little Hoover process, so I can't get out ahead of what's going to be submitted to and then go through the Little Hoover process.
Okay. And then last year's budget agreement also contain $12 million for reparations programs. I don't see anything about that in this proposal. Can you explain where that went? Is it still available?
Yeah, it's still available. That was included in the current year's budget, so it's still in the budget, and it's something that we're continuing to have conversations with the legislature about the allocation of those funds.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Christine Mayduke with KFF Health News. I just wanted to piggyback on Lindsay's question about the new proposed infrastructure and agency for homelessness. I'm curious if, clearly there's a number of arguments for the government and policy side of this. Does it make sense from a funding and financing side, according to DOF? Is this something that can simplify, how these different channels have been managed in the past, or does it make it more complicated as it's implemented potentially?
This is part of the, it's referenced in the governor's budget as part of the plan of the administration, and it's something that we've all been working on. So of course we have our input to ensure that we think it makes sense from a fiscal perspective, and so whatever plans that the administration moves forward with, we would be in agreement with those. I would say that we are. This is something that we think is sorely needed as an administration. Obviously, this is one of the most important issues that we are facing, and understanding that there are ways to better manage at the state level, and some respects be more efficient at the state level. We feel is important. This is an important time to ensure that we're moving forward with that. But with that said, again, the details of the reorg and the new agency are still to come as we move through the process.
And then again, on the potential federal changes to ACA or Medicaid, given that it's such a huge portion of the state budget, what has the DOF staff been doing to kind of game out what potential impacts could be, from the smallest changes to the largest that have been floated out there? Have you guys kind of run those scenarios behind the scenes? And is there a larger kind of ballpark figure you can give us of how much impact that could have on the state budget?
I would not. I don't think it would be. There's any benefit to us to speculating at this point. Again, I think it really. We obviously, our staff working closely with the agency, with Department of Healthcare Services, have been assessing, continue to assess, and running what if scenarios, but until we actually have at least a better understanding of what we are going to face or what we might be facing, I don't think it would make sense to speculate on what that might be at this point.
Okay, and then on the BH Connect program also that's noted, given that that's a late arriving waiver approval that's come from the federal government, from President Biden, I'm curious, first of all, if you have a rough breakdown of the federal versus state funding for that $8 billion program, and then also if there's any concern that potential changes in the new administration could mess with that in some way.
So in terms of breakdown of funding, I don't have it offhand, but Lupe can get it for you before we leave here. I think I would just say it's as not to be evasive here, but as with the prior answer, we just really need to see what happens before we get into speculating on what the impacts might be.
Hello, Kristen Wong with Cal Matters. I had a couple of follow-up questions on the MCO tax. Just to clarify something that you said to Rachel, the amended tax revenue, the very latest amendment that came in December, that's not subject to Prop 35?
Correct.
Okay. Do you have a dollar amount for how much additional revenue that brought in?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but that's Lupe can also get you that.
Okay.
before we-
Okay. This might also be a Lupe question, but I was
Yeah.
wondering, so under Prop 35, because it divides the dollars into a set amount for provider rate increases and then another additional amount that has flexibility, if how much is in the pot of money for flexible spending?
Yeah, we'll
We'll
also
figure that
follow
out.
up.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay. And then one last thing that I wanted to try and square away with the MCO tax. So Prop 35 wiped out the investments that were made in last year's budget tied to the MCO tax, one of which was continuous eligibility funding for children. But the budget document references about $3 billion for the last remaining bit of the public health emergency unwinding, which I believe includes continuous eligibility, at least until June. So I was wondering if that $3 billion incorporates continuous eligibility funded
One of those
through June?
flexibilities.
We'll check.
Another thing
Okay.
that Lupe will
All right. Thank you.
confirm for you. Yes.
Hi, good morning. Tyler Katzenberger from Politico. I know the governor mentioned earlier this week that there would be funding for local journalism included in his budget proposal, as outlined with the agreement that was reached with Google last August. I'm not seeing it in the packet. Is that included in his budget proposal?
It's not mentioned. I believe it is mentioned in the 8 pages, but yes, we are accounting for additional funding for journalism in the budget proposal.
Okay, and just to confirm, that number is $30 million.
$30
as the state
million
agreed
in the
on?
budget year, and then there's I think $10 million a year for a few years after that.
Okay, and then that $10 million commitment, is that outlined in the budget, or just the $30 million for this year?
It's built into the budget. I think our staff can follow up with like exact details of that for you.
Sure. And then does that funding come with any sort of restrictions or guidelines?
Well, so part of it is we are accounting for it. We still are. It's still dependent on I think good conversations on exactly how the details of distribution and use of that funding will play out
Conversations with who?
with the legislature.
Does that also include folks like journalists unions, folks at UC Berkeley that would manage the News Transformation Fund?
I think consistent with most investments, it would include other stakeholders as part of that conversation, particularly folks who would potentially administer the funds.
Mhm. And so just to be clear, there's nothing with this funding then. For instance, I know there was a 12% guarantee for that money to go, like 12% of the cash for that newsroom fund to go to ethnic newsrooms and locally focused newsrooms. So that's not in there, and neither are any of the recommendations that were provided.
There's no details, yet. Those are to be determined.
Okay. And is the governor's office weighing the recommendations that were provided by the Media Guild of the West on Monday?
I am not, unfortunately, due to the events of this week and are focused on today. I don't think I'm familiar with those recommendations, but I could just say generally, of course, we always consider recommendations and feedback back that we get from stakeholders.
And then regarding the $25 million to reimburse NatCast for the NSTC facility for capital costs for that, the Sunnyvale chip design facility, if the Republican-controlled Congress repeals the CHIPS Act, does the state still plan to give that funding, or what would happen to that funding if the CHIPS Act is repealed?
So there are. I think that's something that we'll have to get back to you on the specifics, because there are different impacts probably based on whatever the federal government would do. In some instances, obviously, there's money that's already been out the door allocated or projects already underway. And so I don't know, I couldn't tell you what the specific impact would be now. And also, again, this would be something that would be dependent specifically on what the federal government may do under the next administration. But as it stands now, California was awarded this facility. It's something that's going to create jobs in the state and will really leverage the resources and talent that we have here. And we are moving forward with the project under the current award that we have.
And then on page 82, there's some information about additional opportunities for implementing Gen AI. I'm just wondering, you see some mention of like streamlining internal administrative procurements and multiple mentions, I think, of just streamlining things. So is this in any way intended to offset staffing costs or replace any jobs?
No, and
Okay.
we've been clear on that. And but obviously, as with all efforts, this administration and it's priority for the governor to continue to ensure that we are being efficient with the public's resources. But none of these efforts are intended to replace in any jobs or replace people.
Thank you.
Hi, Director. Andrew Boxford from Bloomberg. A couple quick things. One was, we've already talked a little bit about the film tax credit. Is this accounting for, or are you expecting any changes in what qualifies under the film tax credit? Things above the line, for example, is that an expectation with this?
No, it's not this, and that's an important point, that the credit is for below the line expensive, and we're not anticipating changes that would open it up to above the line expenses. And I think the proposal will likely have will have trailer bill obviously associated with it, but we do realize from past experience that there will be discussions with the legislature to get to the final version here, and so there's probably going to be more to come based on having those discussions.
Sure. And then lastly, there's some discussion here about the interest on the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund loan, $634 million one-time general fund. That's all coming from the general fund, right? There's some discussion here that in the budget for the current year, the expectation was that the employment training fund could be used for some of that.
$50 million, yes, but it's not. We're actually not replacing that now with general fund, and the entirety of the budget year amount is general fund.
And the 634, that's for just the one budget year. That's not
correct.
Okay, great, thanks.
Mr. California Department of Finance Director and Madam California Department of Finance Chief Deputy Director, thanks for taking the time. It's Eitan Wallace here with Nexstar Media stations across California. First question for you, just a logistical matter. Thanks for sharing, by the way, about how the taxes could be impacted by all these fires. Just about the 2,400 new CAL FIRE firefighters in 2018. Does this budget moving forward have any specific goals about how many new firefighters you would like to hire in the next year?
Matt Almy, who oversees our resources department, including CAL FIRE, probably could help answer or address your question.
And
give me a minute.
Take your time.
Hold on.
While you look for that, I can ask second question. That okay? Second question for either of you is just in the sense of the Trump administration. We heard from the governor on Monday, a lot of uncertainties ahead. Is there a concern from you of President-elect Donald Trump's remarks in the past that federal government resources, especially on fires, could be hampered in the coming months and years?
So, as we discussed on the risk slide, one of the risks that we just do see on the economy and revenue front is from potential changes in federal policy from the incoming administration. So I guess the short answer is yes, but would also say that particularly when it comes to emergency response, responding to disasters, that we hope that we continue to have the support that we've always had from the federal government.
Thank you. And final question, quickly, if I may, just because I know there's a lot of numbers here and everything, and thank you so much for going through it. Just for the victims, for the people watching this today, if you had a message for them, what is the message you hope this budget sends to the wildfire victims?
That's a tough question. I would just say, just personally, as a lifelong resident of the state of California, and the love that I just have for this state, and seeing the devastation to communities in the state, and understanding even firsthand from being in this role of having to go to other sites of past wildfires and seeing the devastating impacts to the communities. I just say, just as a Californian, I really feel for the communities, for the people who are really having their lives altered in very significant and tragic ways by this event. I just feel for them, and hope they know that we, as folks who are leaders here of the state, that we're not only thinking of them, but doing what we can here as we manage the state's resources to ensure that we are doing everything that we can to help them as they navigate through responding to this incident.
Thank you. Matt Almy, I cover the natural resources area at Department of Finance. So just for context, last year's budget, the 2024 budget, included the first year of implementation of a 66-hour work week, collective bargaining agreement with the firefighters. It's a multi-year ramp up. And so this year's budget, the proposed budget will include an additional 700 new firefighters as part of that multi-year ramp up. And in full implementation, it's going to be over 2,000 firefighters as part of that.
Hi, Nicole Nixon with the Sacramento Bee. I wanted to ask about the LAO projections on the out years, projecting like 20 billion or more deficits in the coming years. Wondering what your take on this is, and if this budget does anything to prepare for those.
So I mentioned in the presentation that we are seeing, and the LAO pointed this out in their fiscal outlook, that they're part of what they're seeing in the out years is just growth in expenditures of underlying programs in the state. And we are seeing similar things, and we are also seeing some potential deficits in the out years. And that's what we noted in the presentation, that we're going to continue to monitor those specifically as we work towards the May revision, and would include any necessary adjustments to address what we feel needs to be addressed to have a responsible proposal at the May revision.
And then with the state vacancy sweeps, I think you mentioned that CAL FIRE and CHP were protected from those, and you mentioned the fires. Those started obviously this week, and effort has been ongoing for a few months. So can you explain more about why CHP, CAL FIRE, and if there were any others that were not included in the state vacancy sweeps?
Yeah, so I think, again, it goes to the question received earlier on. We started with the estimate of 10,000 and 6,500. That was really going through exercises and a lot of detailed conversations with departments on understanding what positions, resources were tied to 24-hour required posted positions, or positions that were related to health, safety, and so going through those exercises, obviously CAL FIRE, CHP were departments that had those types of resources. CDCR, state hospitals were other entities, And so, granted that exercise and these exemptions happened prior to these fires, we understood that those were resources that we did not want to impact and were exempted from the exercise. In addition to that, as I mentioned earlier, we are there were some administrative support resources that were included in CAL FIRE's budget as part of potentially being subject to the efficiency reduction, but we are exempting CAL FIRE entirely from those efficiency reductions.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Hey there, Alexi Casa from Cal Matters. Following up on that a little bit further, I think there's two new agencies that are proposed in here. There's a consumer protection agency as well. How does that square with the effort to sweep out these thousands of vacant positions? Is there going to be any new positions related to these agencies? Like, can you talk about how you're sort of expanding and contracting government at the same time, I guess?
Yeah, so I don't know if it's we're necessarily expanding. We are creating agencies that specifically focus on duties that are current responsibilities of state government, and so for us, it's a matter of looking at how we are organized and how we can do our jobs better in these particular areas, particularly around how we manage our housing homelessness programs. And so that's what we're putting forward. It's not an effort that necessarily means it's going to, we need to add a lot of new resources, or we're looking for new resources. We're really looking at an assessment of how we manage now and how we can do that better. But getting into specifics, again, this is going to go through the Little Hoover process. And so,
I mean, so should we understand both of these new agencies to be reorganizations, or is there some new elements that will be part of one or both of these new agencies?
I think that the details will still be forthcoming as we are planning now. We're looking at how we reorganize around what we currently have, but the details will be forthcoming.
Can I ask why you're not able to share any additional details at this point? These are kind of big announcements to be making in the budget with no additional information to provide.
Well, we're announcing that this is what the administration is planning for, but the plan is to go through the reorganization process through the Little Hoover Commission. I think this is a state process set up specifically to do that, and so we're announcing and letting the public know that we're planning to undertake that process in order to accomplish this reorganization, and the details will unfold as things are presented to and as the Little Hoover process unfolds.
And is that because the details are not completed yet? The planning process is still underway, or is that because you're just withholding them until the Little Hoover process? And can you give us a timeline for when that process might begin and when we might find out more information?
Let me check with our manager here on the timeline. I think we can give you more information on timeline. Yes.
Okay. And sorry, last thing, and I'm sorry if I missed this earlier. I believe in the fall there was a discussion from the governor about potentially creating another sort of backup account that the state could draw from if it didn't receive disaster aid from the federal government, and that's not, as far as I can tell, in the budget proposal. Was that plan dropped? Was it rolled into some other form? Is there any more information on that you could provide?
Well, as we see now, as that we're in the midst of a current emergency disaster situation. Noted earlier that the governor specifically wanted to include more money in our special fund for economic uncertainties, which is the primary place that we draw from in order to respond to emergencies. It's transferred into the disaster response emergency operations account, and which is a sub account of the SFEU. And so we have included more money there, and that's the money that is the primary source for the state to respond to emergencies, and then work with the federal government on the reimbursable expenses that state makes out of that account.
Okay, so the idea then is just to use the existing kind of financial infrastructure of the state as it is for that goal. How much of the money in the Special Fund for Economic Uncertainty is new? You mentioned the $4.5 billion number. Is that all new money, or was some of it already
So
in there?
that is the Special Fund for Economic Uncertainty is in the simplest terms is kind of like the state's checking account balance, and so every year we have to we're constitutionally required when we adopt budget to have a positive balance in the SFEU. Every year we have to kind of determine the level of funding that we're keeping in the balance of the fund, of the operating account. And this year, and I think the last couple of years, has been between a little bit over $3 billion, $3.5 billion was in the 2024 Budget Act, and we are including a higher level, $5 billion in the 2025 budget proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Eric Ho with Politico. The governor cited costs in like many of his veto messages last year, around 40%. I'm wondering, since you're projecting a modest surplus this year, will the administration sort of take a more lax approach to supporting bills that aren't funded through the budget?
So I'd say it's a little early to specifically answer that question. I would tell you, as a director of the Department of Finance, my view is that bills that result in costs to the state should be contemplated in the budget.
And what's your message to lawmakers who maybe had their bills vetoed last year due to costs, and they may see this proposal and sort of reintroduce it, kind of hoping for a different result?
So I would say, again, we are still the budget is balanced. We have a very modest surplus identified, but our budget proposal recognizes the need to really be restrained in new commitments. And so particularly given the conversation about what our out years may look like. And so those will all be factors, I think, in how we ultimately determine what are reasonable costs to take on this upcoming year, whether that be in the budget or through legislation that might come our way from the legislature.
Thanks.
Hi, Joe. Ashley Zavala with KCRA 3. Thank you so much for doing this very important presentation and taking all our questions. Please forgive me if what I'm asking is redundant. There's been a lot of questions, but I'm not an insurance expert, and I don't know how the two weave together. But in the event that the FAIR plan were to go insolvent, or if there was a situation where what's happening right now in Los Angeles ends up having some major impact on that program, how would that impact the state's financial future or this plan, if you can speak to that?
So I would say that we are obviously it's an issue that we're tracking and analyzing in real time now, but it's still too early. I think in terms of knowing what the ultimate impacts are going to be, it's still too early to really speculate on that. But it's obviously something that we're aware of and assessing in real time.
Okay. And then on disaster relief too, it's my understanding that the governor was planning on going to Washington, D.C. to try to recoup some FEMA funds to get reimbursed for some expenses that the state has already made for disaster relief. Just again, I mean, how much, with all the questions about FEMA, just period, and then with the incoming administration, I mean, where I know that you're the Department of Finance director, and this is probably a question for the governor, but I guess what what happens with the state's financial future or this outlook in the event that maybe we don't get as much help from the federal government as the governor's administration might like?
So we talked about earlier that, it's always associated with, risk of what may or may not happen with the incoming administration. But again, I would also say that would hope that when it comes to disaster emergency response, that we've continued to have the support that we've had. And really, when it comes to some of the reimbursements, it's really about timing, and that's something that we'll continue to work on with the current administration and the incoming administration.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Angela Hart again with KFF. Just a couple of quick follow-up questions to my colleague Christine regarding the federal waivers for BH Connect and CalAIM. I guess I understand the reluctance to speculate. I don't think I'm asking to speculate, but I'm a little surprised about the trepidation that there could be, I guess functionally, could the federal government end those waivers even though they've already been approved? Can you stop them at the state level once they've already been given the stamp of approval and roll them back? I'm not asking will, I'm asking could.
Fortunately, I don't know if I have an answer to that.
Does HHS, is anyone from HHS know?
We will follow up with an answer, I think. But part of, and I know the trepidation, and apologize for if maybe repeating this, but it really is about we still don't know. We can speculate, but we still don't know what's going to happen, and even outside of what we may tell you now, we think we can do or can't do, that could change depending on what happens with the incoming administration. With that said, we will follow up with you on kind of specific answer on what we think our ability is at this point to continue to move forward depending on what they do.
Thank you. I understand that there's uncertainty and risk going forward about what the administration could do. I'm wondering, this is like a CMS rule making procedure. So procedurally, I'm asking, it's my understanding that you can't just halt these waivers once they've been approved at the state level. Am I wrong?
We will follow up with you on that. To make sure that we give you the best, the most accurate answer that we will follow up after.
Okay, thank you. It's important because there's so much federal so many of the governor's initiatives are embedded in these important waivers. They're really important for the state. And just one more follow up on the BH Connect, that $8 billion that's called out, is that new funding? That's new state, federal, and local funding, correct?
Yes.
And the local funding, is that county? Do counties have to come up with their share?
The counties can opt in to the program.
So they're not required to participate?
It's opt-in for the counties.
Oh. Okay, yeah. So I think you were going to follow up with my colleague about the breakdown of state, local, and federal. So yeah, would love to just be included in that, because that's another kind of ambiguity that says state, federal, local. It's not clear that that's an optional program. I thought it was required.
Yeah.
So appreciate that those follow-ups.
Hi, Director Stella Yu with Cal Matters again, asking on behalf of my colleagues. So in the budget, you're proposing $23 million in 1 year and $45 million in the next to evaluate the air cooling systems of 4 prisons. So has the administration yet committed to backing a new Cal OSHA indoor heat rule for correctional facilities, and what's the timeline for that?
That is not something that I'm aware of at this point. I think this is, what's in the budget is our proposal at this time.
Okay, and so has the administration been in talks about this issue?
Yeah, we'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, William Alhado from Sacramento Bee here. I wanted to just briefly ask about the state operations ongoing reductions. In the document, it says 1.5 billion is anticipated in 2024-25, and 2 billion is anticipated in the following fiscal year. Is that, do I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm curious, do you all have any concerns about achieving a higher operations cut in the following year? Kind of once you cut things, what new things do you expect to cut if some of those kind of baseline things have already been eliminated?
Well, we're working. That's one of the things that we've been doing over the last few months, or since the budget's been acted, is working directly with our departments and agencies to refine these levels, and that's what's reflected in the budget, and that's based on those conversations and our understanding of what we think we can reasonably accomplish at this point.
Great, thank you.
And that was our last question.
Thanks, everyone.